Welcome again to today's webinar that we have on Mastering Risk, Unleash the Power of Procurement. By attending this webinar for today, you will be able to learn and identify and assess the potential risk within your supply chain from your organizations, develop and implement effective mitigation strategies, negotiate optimal terms and conditions to protect your organization, optimize supply chain operations for maximum efficiency and cost savings, foster strong and collaborative relationship with your suppliers, and enhance your overall procurement strategy to drive business success. Now, to get all these skills, we have our expert trainer, Sean Sidney, joining us today. So, to give a brief introduction about our trainer, Sean is a recognized leading procurement and negotiation expert and trainer who has specialized in procurement for over 25 years as of now. And Informa has a very long-standing relationship, as Sean does most of our courses, procurement and negotiation courses with Informa. Originally in the global procurement role, Sean now focuses on training and mainly keynote speaking. But Sean is also responsible for categories in complex multinational environments for many multinational companies. He has delivered savings and business value through partnering with stakeholders and suppliers. As a trainer, Sean's knowledge, integrity, and results focus has led into successful long-term relationship with some of the world's leading procurement organizations. So without taking much of your time, I would like to hand over the baton to Sean Sidney, our trainer, to go ahead with the webinar. Over to you, Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Malali. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us. We're going to spend about 15, 20 minutes just looking at how, as procurement, we can master risk and unleash our power. But if we start with the idea that we generally have a lack of power, most of us in procurement feel this, we know this. We're looking to sort of optimize the power that we have. And if you think back in time, what we used to be called purchasing, let's use a different pen, used to be called purchasing. So then we evolved into procurement. So I remember being asked many years ago, what's the difference between purchasing and procurement? And this is many years ago. I thought, oh, I'm not quite sure. So I looked into it, and there's different definitions, but different definitions everywhere. When I started training, I went to some very large organizations. I remember one week I was with an organization, and they had procurement as sort of the global function and purchasing more as the tactical operational function. And literally the next week went to another organization, same structure, but they called their global strategic function purchasing, and they called the more administrative tactical side procurement. So at that point, I realized, okay, there is a difference, but the difference is not necessarily in those definitions. The difference is that we used to be called purchasing, and now we are called procurement. And I remember did some sort of Google search, someone helped me, to see how often those two terms were used over time period in such searches. And I saw very clearly that purchasing was very high. To start with, procurement was low. And over time, there was a cross. And now when if we do the same search now, we'll see that procurement is what we are called more than purchasing. The question I had then for myself was why? And I think the question is, or the answer is fairly easy. It's because purchasing failed. We failed to get our place on the board, failed to deliver the value to the business, failed to be perceived as a critical function within organizations. So it failed. So what happened? New guys came along, chief purchasing officers became chief procurement officers. And they said, yeah, we're not purchasing, we're procurement. We're much more strategic, much more adding value, much more managing risk in the organization. So the difference is basically rebranding, which is fine. But let's see whether procurement has succeeded. Yes, we're getting more professional, more recognized, but still we're not necessarily seen as adding the value that we could or perhaps even are. So when we're looking at our function, we could say the only reason we exist is to serve the business and our stakeholders, whoever they may be, to serve their needs. We've grown over the decades from being more administrative function through to securing supply, through to maybe focusing more on cost, and maybe evolving now into adding value to our organizations to help our organizations sell our products and services better to our customers. So that's where we're evolving. But it still comes back to the fact that we're employed, or we're paid to deliver on the stakeholder goals. Now, stakeholder goals are obviously various according to different organizations. But if we look at typical ones, it will be operational continuity. And that's perhaps the most important thing for us to do. We're not necessarily measured on it all the time. We're not necessarily focusing on it, but that's what lies beneath everything. We're there to get the right product into the right place, etc., to our organization. Also, additionally, stakeholders may have goals of financial stability, quality assurance, innovation and competitiveness. Again, more perhaps focusing now on the end customer, and of course, sustainability. So these goals are very important to our organization. However, linked to these goals, obviously, are risks. Now, we're not looking at what we're measured on or what we're specifically trying to achieve. We're looking at the risks for our stakeholders. And again, that's what they really want us to do. Organizations differ, but somewhere between 60 or 70% of the value of the value that comes into an organization is from procurement. You look at the revenue that comes in, 60 or 70% of that revenue is spent by procurement. So we have a critical role, say first maybe to secure supply continuity, but there's other risks as well. So we look at some of those risks. Again, we could write 100 risks if we wanted to, but here's some typical ones: supply chain disruption, supplier monopoly taking losing control, price volatility, quality issues, and maybe some like an innovation lag, where we're not using our supply base to drive innovation for our customers. Some typical risks, I say there are lots more we could look at. Then we can use a very standard is not a bad word, very recognized, tested matrix, which helps us look at the risk in terms of impact and probability. This is not a procurement tool. We can use it as a procurement tool. This is, of course, a risk management tool. Whether you're working in your function now, or whether you're working for NASA on a space launch, whatever you're doing, risk matrix is the same for everybody. Basically, we have those two axes. We have impact. So if the risk does happen, what's the consequence to the organization? Very important. And additionally, what is the likelihood or probability of that event happening? High risk is both of these. High risk is not just about what the impact is. Obviously, that's a very important thing. So we looked at risk. We're looking at maybe high impact up here and the high probability here. Then that is obviously extremely high risk. And what we should be doing in procurement is mapping this, looking at all the risks that we as an organization face, which procurement are involved in. So linking with our stakeholders, aligning with our stakeholders to ensure that the risks that they feel they see are recognized by us and mapped by us. So if it's anything to do with supply chain, we're responsible for that. We must make sure that these risks we're aware of. So we go to the organization, we find there's a risks here and some risks here, and maybe a risk here. And we map those risks. And obviously, we're going to prioritize, obviously, by how high the risk is. So if we draw this like so, and this like so, we still get high risk, medium risk, and low risk. That can also be divided into different ways. So we can do that in different ways, but basically, we're looking to identify risks, prioritize risks, and then the challenge, of course, is to manage, mitigate those risks. And we do that very simply, of all these types of matrix, is by either reducing the impact or reducing, whoops, bear with me. There we go, technology. Or by reducing the probability. So we're looking at either one of those things. And again, we're working in alignment, in collaboration with our stakeholders, and as we will see in a moment, also with our suppliers. So this is very powerful. This is where we add value, show value. So no longer are we a function that just knocks on the door and causes problems for our stakeholders, making things slower or more complex, or focusing on price and cost rather than the overall value. We're focusing more on total cost of ownership. So we're doing our job much more effectively. And by working with stakeholders closely, we're being seen to do our job more effectively. Okay, so that is all great, But where does that leave us with our objectives? So with our unleashing it in terms of managing the risk for procurement for our stakeholders. And again, we have strategies for that. We have things like, again, these are just examples, diversifying the supplier base, building strategic partnerships, quality improvement programs, all these things we can lead or be a critical part of, sharing risk with suppliers, and obviously contingency planning. So when things do go wrong, we are already in a place to mitigate, manage the consequence of that. So we have these strategies, and we know these strategies, and we can work with stakeholders. We can lead stakeholders. We can identify the risks, collaborate with stakeholders to manage these risks. And this is where we're really seen to add value. So rather than the frenemy of our stakeholders, we become the friend. We become supportive. So when we knock on their door, they don't say they're busy and try and avoid seeing us. They say they welcome us in, have a cup of coffee, sure, and then we'll become a strategic partner, really adding value to the organization. But as I was just saying, that's great. What we're also looking to do is unleash our procurement goals. We have targets. Our targets are varied, of course, but for most of us, they're partly or primarily to do with cost savings. And we sometimes wonder why cost savings is the focus area of procurement. Pretty obvious. First of all, we spend a lot of money. So therefore, any small reduction in cost creates a great benefit to the company. Secondly, any benefit to the company goes to the bottom line. If you're working on a project and you save, I don't know, $100,000, when you look at your organization's profit and loss next year, if you're able to see that, when you look at their profit and loss, you can say $100,000 of that profit was down to my project, because everything that we do goes to the bottom line. Revenue is very important. Sales guys, very important. If you're there, high. Sales guys are very important, but their increase in revenue is eaten away by the cost of the organization. So sometimes a 5 million increase in revenue is less than a 1 million saving from procurement. So we have these procurement goals. And why also are we measured on cost? Because it's the easiest thing to measure. How do you measure? You can, and we do, and you may have examples, but how do we measure procurement on successfully innovating? Or we do sustainability, but it's more difficult to quantify. So we are measured on other value drivers in the organization, but the easiest and the biggest and the highlight one sticking up there is cost. So we're measured on that. So we have a challenge that our objective of cost sometimes is aligned to the business, sometimes it is aligned with our stakeholder needs, but often it conflicts. So when we're doing our job getting our cost savings, that's where the friction, the issues start with our stakeholder. However, we have a little trick we can play, which is a positive trick for the organization, so it's not a nasty trick. And if we use our friend, the Crowley's matrix, procurement matrix, just briefly to look at this, we see most of the saving, most of the risk area will be here. So when we're looking at risk, inevitably here, there's higher spend, but there's more complexity, more challenges, more criticality for the business. So most of our areas of focus will inevitably end up in the strategic partnership box. Now, by working with stakeholders and suppliers, we can reduce the risk together. However, by challenging a stakeholder who previously has resisted approving a new supplier because they're very happy with their old one, they don't want to have that change or any other challenges, challenge them and say, what happens if there's an issue with the supplier? Okay, bankrupt, financial issues, or supply disruptions, or some political event, something that happens that means we can no longer get this product or service, this critical product or service from our supplier. We have to then find another supplier. That's a process, can take you a week, it can take you a year and a half to approve a new supplier. So that's a huge risk for the organization. So challenge them with that risk. It's your responsibility to identify these risks as well. And this is a win-win. So then the outcome of that discussion is often, well, let's find one as a backup, as a contingency. Let's get them approved as a contingency. And once you're in that position, you're in the position where you've increased competition, you've increased your position of power with the current supplier. You can benchmark effectively. You can use that new supplier as a threat to the incumbent, and suddenly not only are you empowered to manage the risks of the organization, as we addressed earlier, but you're also able to drive some cost savings. So the best way of getting cost savings, we know, is to turn a non-competitive environment into a competitive environment. Persuading stakeholders to go down that path is very difficult. So what we can do here is use the idea of risk to bring in these new suppliers, but one supplier will increase your competitiveness hugely. So mastering risk, unleashing the power of procurement is all about initially working with stakeholders. You know this already. Working with stakeholders to identify their risks and to work with them to reduce those risks, either in the probability or the impact side, make it less likely to happen, or make the impact by awareness or by contingency much more effective. So that's the first thing we do. Additionally, the second level of that is unleashing our power to achieve our objectives as a procurement function. We're going to need to align with stakeholders, win their trust, and find a collaborative reason why we can work together to achieve their objectives. Good. So that's the webinar. I'm very happy to stay here with you guys, answer any questions. So I will, if you have any questions, I'll see a couple in the chat box below. If you want to ask those, I will answer the best I can. But for those who need to shoot off, but I'll let Manali speak with us first. Manali.
So thank you very much, Sean, for this very insightful webinar. So we have a couple of questions. Will you be able to see that in the Q&A box?
Yeah, glasses on, excuse me, guys.
How
can we diversify our risk in a single source or sole source scenario due to monopoly? We can still do that. We're very obviously very restricted there in terms of bringing another supplier, obviously by definition. So that's perhaps not possible, but it's still worth exploring, understanding why it's a monopoly. Monopolies are usually market-driven, market events, but often some internal specification or stakeholder support could maybe change things slightly, but let's park that for now. In terms of when we're working with monopoly, identify the risks and use the matrix to identify those risks and see where, every time you identify a risk, you say why the probability is high or what the impact is, and then you find ways working with your stakeholder and now very much with your supplier to address those risks. Sit down with them and say, we have these concerns. Those concerns won't be new to the supplier. They're either aware of them or working with their other customers on there. So sometimes the solutions are very easy. Sometimes it needs a bit of persuasion, but often those solutions are very easy. So great, identify what's causing the risk, probability, impact, and then sit down with the supplier and the stakeholder as a collaborative team. Because if we look at the matrix, what we're saying here is in strategic, I quite like to move to leverage and perhaps back again to get the competitiveness. But if not, we're in here. We make the best of the situation. We work together with our stakeholders and with our suppliers to make a very bad situation less bad, in cost ways, of course, but in terms of risk, exactly the same applies. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit, Sam. And the second follow-up was what strategies to be employed. It's again, the strategies can vary, and those relate or rely on the cause of the risk. So identify that and then partner. And if partnership collaboration is a strategy, then that's probably the one to do. Yeah, can you explain the matrix in more detail? It is certainly, Kanan, thanks very much for the question. I'll give a brief explanation. Many of you will be familiar with the matrix. It's been around since Peter Kraljich, 1989, Harvard, whatever, but it's been part of our best tool. And we use other tools in our procurement function, but this is the one that's ours, and I by far think it's the best. There's different versions of it. It's evolved a bit over time. So the one you see here, maybe not what you're used to, but this is what I use, and I think this is the best. Basically, two axes, as you can see: spend, how much. First of all, it looks at your categories. So Canon, it looks at what you're responsible for. If you're procurement director, well done. If procurement director, you're looking at your whole procurement function. If you're a category manager, you're looking at your categories. So it looks at what you control, what you're focusing on. So part of that obviously is spend. That's, of course, money, cost is very important to the organization. and extremely important for us in procurement. So obviously we're going to focus on higher spend categories, subcategories, the lower spend categories. Okay, that's part of it, of course. The second part is then the complexity. It used to be called risk or supply risk, still can be. This is saying about how difficult is our job to do. And we look internally and externally. For example, internally, if we don't have clear specifications or our specifications are very much bespoke to us, or even worse, they're the supplier's specifications, our life is going to be very difficult. If our stakeholders aren't all aligned with each other, it's very difficult. If the stakeholders have no trust with us or a very strong relationship with a supplier, it gets very difficult for us. So lots of internal reasons why our life is more complex or less complex. Similarly, externally, talk about monopoly, talk about other challenges, lead times, political upheaval. Lots of issues can drive the challenges that we have externally. So those add together, and basically what we say is half our categories are higher risk and half are higher complexity, and half are lower complexity. Very simple. And then we get the four quadrants, for those who don't know: routine or non-critical, very lots of these, low value individually, but making up about 10% of the total spend for you guys. But the strategy here, as it's very unimportant, we don't want to spend time on this. We'd much rather spend time where we really add value. So what we do here is we minimize everything. We automate, we delegate, we outsource, we aggregate. We try to minimize the work we have involved. Bottleneck, same as routine in terms of the spend and the number of categories we have here. But these are more important. These may be critical to the business or very challenging. So we say here the strategy is to just get the product in to the right quality or innovation, or whatever the requirements for criticality is. Just get the product in. We're not so worried about cost here. Yeah, every dollar counts, but not so worried about cost because there's lots to do here. We'd rather spend our time here in leverage. This is where we have power. 40% of our spend is here. We're going to get the suppliers to compete with each other, divide and rule. So they're fighting for our business. It's easy for us to change. It's low risk. Standardization, commoditization across the industry. So we can go from one supplier to another supplier, picking the best one in terms of price, where it suits us. Then that leads us to strategic. Strategic is where we're going to spend most of our time, most of our value. So 40% of the spend, but other spend is trapped here in difficult relationships where we can't get out very easily and change. So we're being charged too much for the products and services in here. So there is a great savings opportunity if we can move into leverage, but very difficult. If we can, great. If we can't, then we need to focus and work on here in the category with the monopolistic type. May not even be monopolistic, just locked in supplier. Find a way of working together to reduce costs, reduce risk, increase innovation, or whatever else is important for you guys. So that's the matrix. So I'd recommend those who don't know it or those who aren't using it to map all your categories on here, again saying why something's here, the reasons, and there's going to be good reasons and bad reasons for being in here. The good reasons are, yeah, we look long-term relationship, collaboration, etc., etc. We need to be in a partnership. Perfect. Bad reasons are we're stuck. We can't move. We should move. It should be a standard product, but it's not, or we can't get out of this relationship. So therefore, we're missing the opportunity to find better or cheaper suppliers by moving into leverage. So strategic is a place where you're going to spend, you should be looking to spend 3/4 of your time, because that's where the organization has the most risk and most value to be added. And that's also where your cost saving opportunities are most likely. Last point, people often ask why aren't the cost saving opportunities here? Because the low hanging fruit is being picked, because the competition there is already giving you a good price. Doesn't mean you don't have to work hard to keep it down. Doesn't mean if you don't work harder and better, you can reduce it further, of course, but that's a marginal increase relatively. But here, there is a significant opportunity. So that was Hassan. Yep, another one from Hassan. Can we foster collaboration and communication between procurement teams and senior management to align goals and address challenges effectively? Yes, we absolutely can. And it's not simple. I can say it's simple when I say how simply you do it. I know in reality it's not, but it's simply we need to work out what their objectives are and show that we can support them to achieve their objectives. If they've got an annual review with tough targets coming up in, where are we now, in 5 months, and we can go along and say, hey, we can help you achieve your objectives, hit your targets, they're going to be open to those suggestions. So align, understand their goals and objectives, and then work out what we can do to support them to get their goals. That builds the relationships, adds value for the company, and potentially then gives us an opportunity to work with them on our goals. Thanks, Kanan. It's simply not and not easy by any means. No, that's relating to yeah, absolutely, I agree. It's not easy, and I always think it's about improving your position. If your position is excellent, you haven't got far to go, so don't focus on it. If your position is good, then try and make it excellent. If your position is really bad, which many procurement professionals we feel, or the reality is with our stakeholders, then we need to build trust, and trust comes from being there together, communicating, asking what are their objectives, what are their challenges, what are their risks, and then working out how we can support them to achieve that. It's not a magic wand, it's not immediate, and it may fail, but that's basically the only way that we are going to have a chance. But good comment. Strategic is working with the mainly monopoly vendors. Is it a good plan to try working with other vendors to qualify them to compete in leverage, even if that means spending more money? Yes, this is where you need to work out what options you have, what opportunities you have, even draw up a plan to show the business that if you invest, I'm making this up, $800,000 in developing a new supplier, and that will give you $500,000 saving a year for the next 3 years, then you've got a business case. If you're going to add to that the risk, as we talked about, which scares management more, then always think about it. But you say, what happens if this supplier stops supplying us? It's, well, you'll solve it. No, we won't. Not within the period you require. So we can do this with monopoly vendors. It's important to say that we're looking for partnerships. I'm big on collaboration, and you guys are as well. We're looking to collaborate where it's right, and it usually is right to some degree. And that's where we're going to, if we're stuck for bad reasons, we move to leverage. We find, if we're lucky, 3 suppliers who can potentially be our partner. And so then we get them competing for our partnership and move back. So we get the best of both worlds. We get a motivated, competitive, capable supplier to work with us, to collaborate with us. So not sure what question that answered, but that's an answer. How do you see the Red Sea crisis and how to manage supply? At what points be added in contract? Now, it's obviously very hard to predict what's going to happen, but that's our job to do. If a supplier says to us, if a stakeholder says, this product is critical for us, then we have to, with them or doing our own research, think about all the things that could go wrong. Now, not everything, but most things that go wrong in terms of what cause damage and impact to risk, or most things that go wrong were somehow predicted or predictable. The Red Sea crisis, I'm not saying we predicted that, but if you're getting all your product from the Far East, and you're in Europe, for example, then you have to recognize that there could be supply chain disruptions. So what supply chain disruptions could there be? You could have a whole list of them. If they're all incredibly unlikely and the impact is quite small, then you're not going to bother about it because you only have limited time. But if you have a critical product, or product in this case rather than service, a critical product, and you want to, then you have to look at all the different risks. And if there's supply chain risk, it doesn't have to be the Red Sea crisis. It could be other things, pirates or storms or political tensions, could be anything. You recognize there are a number of those risks. Now, you can't necessarily manage the risk of the Red Sea crisis itself. What you can say is, what would happen if there was a disruption? And then the basic solution would be 2 strategies. One would be to hold more inventory. We never like that, but it's a very good strategy sometimes. Another one would be to source more locally, or at least have a backup source locally, which you can definitely access. So there are things you can do to look at those risks. But things happen, and it's not just about avoiding them. It's about being prepared to mitigate, reduce the impact when it does happen. So yes, you can try to do things here. Ideally, Ahmed, thank you. Which quadrant should take the most of your procurement time and focus? Good question. Definitely strategic. Definitely strategic. This is where your objectives will be met most with cost savings, because if you can move one of your categories from, you won't have many categories in strategic. You only have about, because we have the 80-20 rule here, spend about 20/80 in terms of categories. So even if you had 50 categories in some categories, even if you did, you'd only have 10 up here, and 5 of those would be here. So we're very few, and then these aren't negotiated every year either. Usually on longer term contracts, sometimes 1 year, but usually 3 or 5 or even longer. So maybe only 1 or 2 a year will be the ones that you actually have to be involved in negotiating with the current supplier or bringing new suppliers. So that's where you spend your time, because if you can move one of those over here, you will release 20 or potentially 30 or maybe more % of savings. And also, this is where the organization will see the most risks. There's lots of risks here as well. We need to identify those, to manage those. But this is obviously the ones that stand out in terms of the size. So yes, definitely spend your time in strategic. However, I know this, you know this, you're going to get dragged into other areas where there's less value. And that's part of your job in procurement, is to manage that. So you're not getting continually issues or spending time on the less important. I'm not saying this is not important. All I'm saying is this is much less important than strategic. So you're going to focus your time. Last question, maybe. Could you please let us know how to manage the right clauses at the time of pre-award contract, and how to monitor and how to evaluate post-award contract? Well, tough last question. I would say, first of all, you have sources for this. A very important stakeholder to connect with is your legal team. I know some of you will be working closely with your legal team. Some of you may hardly ever speak to them. These are the guys who can answer those questions and support you. Legal, obviously, they focus on risk, and they are very risk averse. That's their job. So it is sometimes difficult to persuade them to be flexible with the clauses, but you need to partner with them. You need to explain the commercial aspects, working with them on their experience and their management of the risk and the clauses. You can then find a process or a way of managing that. Also, it's a very easy answer. I'm so guilty giving this answer, but you can ask a lot of these questions on various AI models. They will give you, most of you using that, but if you're not, try, we all know it's been around, ChatGPT, to ask these questions, and you can never put your organization's name in, but you can put specifics in terms of industry, the type of supplier, the product and service you're buying, and anything else. And it will help you very much with these clauses, much more than I can do. But very good question. Good. So I'll wait a few seconds, see if there's any more questions, but those who have stayed, thank you very much. Look forward to maybe seeing you sometime in the future. So thanks very much, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day stroke evenings. And I'll pass it back to Manali here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you, attendees, for joining this webinar. So we have upcoming training. If you want to know more about the procurement and negotiation techniques, we have upcoming courses of Sean Sydney, and we'll be soon sending you out with the dates and email. So if that aligns with your professional goals, we are strongly advised to sign up for those courses. So thank you once again, everyone, and have a good evening ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
What if you and your team can be even more? Even more informed, competitive, accomplished, even more successful, with programs designed to inspire and empower everyone to become even more. Introducing Informa Connect Academy. With hundreds of global, digital, and in-person training courses led by world-renowned industry experts. Reimagining learning experiences for even more unlocked potential. Informa Connect Academy, available at informaconnect.com/academy.